Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Saturday, April 12th, 2025, and on Saturday we look into sports and humor. And today we're going to be talking about the world's most popular sport. If you stick around, I'm going to take it perhaps in a very different direction than you might have anticipated. So let's talk about first, what is the world's most popular sport? We all know the answer to that question, right? Or I suspect that most of us think we know the answer. And I guess it depends in part on whether you're measuring popularity by fan base or by actual participation. So if you did it by fan base, there's an estimated 3.5 to 4 billion people who are fans of soccer, as we like to refer to it in North America, or football across most of the rest of the globe. In second place would be cricket, with at least 2.5 billion fans. And while there's some dispute, it seems that basketball has grown significantly in the last couple of decades, and by most analysts, they estimate it as the third most popular sport, at least again in terms of fan base. And now, believe it or not, it's even harder to find reliable estimates on the actual number of participants. People who play recreationally or play once or twice a week or join leagues, that sort of thing. So if you're looking at participation, it's, as I say, it's kind of difficult to estimate the absolute number of participants in any of these sports. That said, soccer is probably still the most commonly played team sport in all of the world. It's basically the simplest, only in the sense that it only requires a ball and just some land, some space to be able to kick the ball around, right? So, in general, I think soccer is probably the world's most common sport, at least by conventional standards. In fact, I think I have a different answer. So what's the most popular sport in the world? War. Warfare. Yeah, at least over the course of human history, that seems to be the most popular sport. Every country and every territorial claim has been rooted in some form of violence. And it's all about claiming the land for our people, for our tribe. So yeah, we love violence. We love sports, most of us. I study violence for a living. But in terms of this whole land thing, there's no question that that's the sport of choice. And it links to other kinds of sports too, right? I mean, George Carlin's probably the most famous comedian who pointed out years ago the unique aspects of the American pastime that are connected with land acquisition, that is, American football. Carlin said about the game, and some of you will know this, in football, the object is for the quarterback, also known as the field general, to be on target with his aerial assault, riddling the defense by hitting his receivers with deadly accuracy in spite of the blitz, even if he has to use the shotgun. With short bullet passes and long bombs, he marches his troops into enemy territory, balancing this aerial assault with a sustained ground attack that punches holes in the forward wall of the enemy's defensive line. End quote. So I'd like to expand upon Carlin's analysis for a moment, just talking about football. Because if you think about football, again, specifically American football, it's all about controlling key resources, like the football, like the land that we stand on, even controlling the time or the clock. We don't have all day, but we'll all start fighting when we decide it's time to attack. We have the football. And to be clear, we have our own army ready to attack the opposition. We have soldiers in color-coordinated uniforms attacking the enemy soldiers who have their own color-coordinated uniforms. And we want to attack the enemy by identifying specifically their vulnerabilities and exploiting their weaknesses. Why? Well, so that we can ram the football down their throats, take their land, wipe them off the field. It's the ultimate act, if you think about it, of colonialism and even cultural genocide, because once we've succeeded in controlling the land, we've achieved our ultimate goal. We reach the end, or more specifically or technically, the end zone. That's the end game, isn't it? So once we've done that, once we've scored, and who's not happy after they score, am I right? Following our military victory, that's when the celebration, that's when the cheering really begins. You know, the sailor, remember the famous photo? The sailor grabs the random woman at the end of World War II and kisses her. You know, that iconic photo. But in football, the same thing happens. Or strangers just hug and grope each other randomly, deliriously happy. The band plays the victory anthem. And everyone waves the team flags to accompany their team wardrobes and in many cases their own war paint. At least vicariously, they're at war too. Well, I have much more to say about football, but I want to get back to the number one sport. Again, it's parallel, but the number one sport in the world, which is, warfare. And again, it shares so much in common with football. So as noted, at least, everyone has, throughout history, in terms of every country, every culture, every tribe, has played the game of warfare, at least once in a while. No land could be acquired or held on to otherwise, or without a good defense. And by my estimation, then, every group of peoples everywhere on the planet has to have some kind of defense to protect their territory from invaders and unwanted visitors, or the Dallas Cowboys. By the way, according to the Global Peace Index, there are currently an estimated 92 countries in the world involved in conflicts or wars beyond their own borders. So that's almost half the countries. That's about 47% of the officially recognized countries in the world today. And there are currently a great many other land disputes in many places that we might not hear about all that often, especially since we tend to be nestled away here in the safety and the recluse of North America. And so these include, for example, in the Himalayas, you've got these ongoing disputes between China and India, to say nothing about Bhutan and Nepal. And of course, there's many more other areas where you've got these disputes, the land disputes, the border disputes, and that sort of thing. And apparently even here in the U.S. and Canada, which I wasn't aware of until recently. I didn't think we had a land dispute, but apparently there's some leaders in the U.S. who shall remain nameless, who have described the border between our two countries as, quote, an artificial line that looks like it was done with a ruler, end quote. So, now what's the ultimate sport, or the most extreme sport, like the X Games? It's global domination through warfare. And where is that sport to be played? We have a new site, a chosen location for the ultimate in global domination. The destination to determine the ultimate victor in global domination. Where's that place? Greenland. That's right. Greenland. Forget your Soviet-US Cold War, the Russian invasion of Ukraine more recently, of course, the Israel-Hamas war, the more than 35 armed conflicts in Africa, or the 21 currently ongoing in Asia, and so on. It's Greenland. That's the key. That's the ultimate battleground. Now, speaking for myself, I never learned much about Greenland when I was growing up, despite its geophysical location as part of North America. Now, how did I learn that fact? Well, not in school. I don't ever recall Greenland coming up in my long and arduous public education in Fairfax County, Virginia. But I did learn a lot about geography, like every other kid my age in the 60s and 70s, from playing Risk, the board game. Right? And I gained similar expertise, not only in being able to locate Greenland, but also other strategic countries, in quotes, on the global map that I hadn't heard of, like Madagascar, Congo, Indonesia, and then these really exotic places like Kamchatka, Irkutsk, Yakutsk, and Alberta. Unfortunately, the geopolitical map tends to be a bit unstable, and only a couple of these are really countries. I mean, Risk had other real countries too, right? Like China and India, Peru and Brazil, and many others. And then they dropped a few places altogether, like the Caribbean. But there are so many of these unusual places that I hadn't heard of outside of playing the game of Risk. Now, again, a couple of these were still, and the odd ones that I just cited a moment ago are real countries. Madagascar has remained, well, an independent country, an independent state, the Republic of Madagascar since 1960. And Indonesia, that massive archipelago that comprises hundreds of ethnic and linguistic groups, and about 285 million people, by the way, nowadays, that's been an independent country since August 17th, 1945, following Japan's surrender after the Second World War. And by the way, finally recognized by the Dutch in 1949. Took them a while, but nonetheless. And Congo, by the way, is actually the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DR Congo, the 11th largest country in the world, at least by landmass, and with 111 million people. So that's not an insubstantial number of people. But there's also, and maybe you didn't know this, a second much smaller country, and I'm not making this up, the Republic of the Congo. So you've got the Democratic Republic of the Congo, this massive country, 111 million people. Then you've got just the Republic of the Congo, or Congo Brazzaville, or simply Congo, with 6.2 million people. And again, then you've got the places I mentioned like Kamchatka, Irkutsk, and Yakutsk, which are actually regions of Russia. Same with Siberia. That's on the board there too in Risk, at least the original. And so the makers of Risk, I guess, really wanted to be clear about breaking up the Soviet Union into these different regions because there's no Russia on the board, right? And I kind of feel like they were distorting our knowledge of history because they were essentially misrepresenting the geopolitical map and the Cold War. So we didn't have then, in the Risk game, we didn't have the Soviet Union versus the United States as the underlying quest for global domination. And I guess maybe that would have been too easy or too obvious a setup as such. And so the idea behind Risk, the board game, was, again, not just, the Cold War or Soviets versus the US, but it's about total global domination. All right. The game officially ends if and when the world is ruled by just one army entirely. All 42 territories spanning the 6 continents of the world. At least that's how it was represented in Risk. Yes, there's the 7th continent, Antarctica, but I guess even Risk recognized that that couldn't be owned by anyone because of the 1959 Antarctic Treaty. And I actually did learn that little piece of history when I was growing up in school, when I learned that we had 7 different continents. And we learned about Antarctica. And yeah, so there's this peace treaty, and so no one's allowed to own Antarctica. Didn't really fit into the whole Risk mantra. So anyway, and then what about Alberta? My poor beloved Canada was split into 4 regions then. Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and Northwest Territories. And similarly, my beloved U.S. was split into not the Civil War combatants, which you would think would be logical, the North versus South. No, again, they wanted to avoid that piece of history. So instead, it was divided between Eastern U.S. and Western U.S. and Alaska. Go figure. So in short, I guess I'm just suggesting that while I learned a bit about geography from the many hours that we spent playing Risk, I also needed to pull out the encyclopedia to do my actual geography or history reports with a little bit more accuracy. First time I tried to use risk in writing my report, I didn't do so well on my project grade. Apparently I wasn't referencing the right regions, sources, names of countries, capitals, that sort of thing. I thought risk had it all right. Not true. And so that brings me then back to Greenland. So apparently the future of the world order and this whole global domination thing implicates Greenland above all other regions of the world. You think I'm kidding? Well, yes, to some extent I am. But that's the point of the vlog by and large. But there's a serious element too. Frederick Harhoff published a scholarly article back in 1989 where he outlined the military significance of the Arctic, partly because of the fact that the Arctic waters of the two global superpowers merged or connected with one another, the US and the then Soviet Union. And so they were in these geographically adjacent and connecting regions. And also, Harhoff noted that with the new warfare technologies, and notably the nuclear-powered and armored submarines, all of this facilitated advanced missile launching opportunities in the Arctic waters. So there's a strategic element here with respect to the Arctic. And so Harhoff, in this particular article, he went on to talk about the legal and political structure of the Greenland Home Rule, to argue in favor of the region having a more decisive say in its security policy matters for both political and environmental reasons, which I won't get into. And so what most of us probably wouldn't have learned, myself included, was that in 1979, a majority of voters in Greenland supported home rule independently of Denmark. And that led to the creation of the Greenlandic Parliament and increased self-governance in key areas that included education, health, fisheries, the environment, and selected other domestic matters. And then further autonomy was established in 2009. Maybe you didn't hear about this. What happened was that Greenland held a non-binding referendum the previous year, 2008, and 76%, over 76%, voted to support Greenland's self-governance. The Danish parliament promised to honor the results, and as a result, the expansion of home rule took place officially, or took effect on June 21st, 2009, the 30th anniversary of the establishment of home rule, when the Act of Greenland Self-Government took effect. So note then that President Obama wasn't in office even 6 months when he lost Greenland. Thanks, President Barack Hussein Obama. So now you might begin to understand why the current president of the US, President Trump, wants Greenland so badly. Trump wants to, on the one hand, undo everything that the Democrats have ever done, right? Like the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which hasn't been successful yet in doing, renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and to get Greenland back. Now, again, I'm not sure that these latter two issues really had anything to do with the Democrats per se, but why not blame them? Anyway, here's the reality. The reality is that Greenland straddles both North America and the North Pole region. And the flight time, commercially speaking, if you wanted to get from the capital, Nuuk, to Baltimore, Maryland, for example, is about 4.5 hours. And if you wanted to fly from Greenland's capital, Nuuk, to Montreal, that would take about 3.5 hours. Okay? And Greenland's massive land area sits astride the direct sea routes from Europe to the US and over the North Pole. So why does any of that matter? Well, the ice has been melting up there around the North Pole for quite some time, at least according to the latest reports from Santa and his elves who are standing sentry up there. And so that means that the waterways are growing larger. More important, we're concerned, what if Greenland were to fall under the influence of China or Russia? That has direct security implications for both the United States and Canada. And so experts in international diplomacy have long argued that the U.S. should continue to increase their diplomacy, trade, and security cooperation with Greenland, both directly and through the Danish government. The idea would be to solidify North America and adjacent parts of the Arctic as a stable and secure area that would substantially contribute to the U.S.'s homeland defense. Now, let's be clear. There's no imminent threat per se, but both Russia and China have expanded their pressure in the region. They're using icebreakers, for example, and increasing their shipping potential. And at least in the case of Russia, they've increased military presence up there as well. And at the same time, Greenland does not have their own standing army. Instead, Denmark provides for most of Greenland's military defense. And recently, Denmark's defense minister has conceded that the Nordic country does not or has not done enough to protect the autonomous territory of Greenland, and thus revealed a plan to spend about $1.5 billion on a couple of new inspection ships, a couple of drones, and I think most importantly, 2 new dog sled patrols. And I'm not making that up. And so here's the tricky part, though. Denmark's not interested in ceding Greenland to the U.S., and the Greenlanders themselves overwhelmingly have no interest in joining the U.S. But, undeterred, President Trump has recently stated the following in a radio interview in March. Quote, the U.S. has, quote, to let them know that we need Greenland for international safety and security. We need it. We have to have it. It's an island from a defensive posture and even offensive posture. It's something we need. And when you look at the ships going up their shores by the hundreds, it's a busy place, end quote. And so again, the president went on to acknowledge that he wasn't sure if Greenlanders were ready to be citizens of the United States, and then again stated the following, but I think we have to do it and convince them. And we have to have the land because it's not possible to properly defend a large section of this earth, not just the U.S., without it. So we have to have it, and I think we will have it, end quote. And again, if you've ever played Risk, you'll certainly know that it's a crucial piece of land, that is Greenland. That and Alaska, which, again, thankfully, the U.S. already owns. So if you've ever played Risk, you have to understand, or you'll know that you have to hold on to Alaska as a bulwark against Russian or Asian aggression of any kind. That's the only place where you can directly attack North America from Asia on the board game. And likewise, you have to hold Greenland. That's the only place between Europe and North America where there's a direct attack option. And if you recall, though, that has to be waged from Iceland. So maybe it's good to have Iceland, too. Well, but who really cares about all of this? Well, the problem is, too, we all know how weak Europe tends to be militarily, which means that we would essentially just be sitting ducks for any serious-minded entities like Ukraine or Russia or China to gather up their forces, plow through Europe, amass troops in Iceland, and then possibly invade. Right? Now, recall, thankfully, Trump is one of the world's greatest military masterminds. How do we know this? Well, remember that despite never having served in the military, he had to avoid Vietnam because of bone spurs. We all know about that, legitimate reason. And having never read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, he once stated, quote, I know more than the generals. So, you know he's a mastermind. He's told us. And he's also a very stable genius. And he's renowned for having his name listed on The Art of the Deal. So there's that. He's got a writing credit on that one. So we know he's a military expert. We know he's a strategic thinker. We know he can make deals with just about anyone. And so we need to take him seriously when he stated 2 weeks ago in an interview with NBC, quote, we'll get Greenland. Yeah, 100%. Right? And then argued that while there's a, quote, good possibility that we could do it without military force, I don't take anything off the table, end quote. And his vice president, J.D. Vance, chimed in with the following, using his signature approach to international diplomacy upon his arrival in Greenland. Quote, our message to Denmark is very simple. You've not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass. End quote. So there you have it. Now, unfortunately for Trump and Vance and the US, and I suppose the rest of humanity, Greenland doesn't really seem to be all that interested in joining the US. And in fact, according to Greenland's new prime minister, the 33-year-old Jens Fredrik Nielsen, he also does the Nielsen ratings in the US, but he was just sworn in on April 7th. And he stated, quote, President Trump says that the United States is getting Greenland. Let me be clear. The United States won't get that. We do not belong to anyone else. We determine our own future. End quote. Whew, well, that's that. That's a crisis averted, right? I mean, there's one principle that we all stand behind, right, in the modern world, in the international community, and it's the sanctity of sovereign nations everywhere. It's respect the autonomy and the right to self-determination of peoples everywhere on the planet. And of course, especially if you're talking about the indigenous peoples of different regions, right? As proud North Americans of the former Turtle Island, we stand by our record in that regard. Okay, and for the record, by the way, this is what we call political satire. It's a form of humor. Don't be upset. So we have to be able to laugh at ourselves, right? Especially in the craziest of times. And in fact, just to blow off some steam, I think I'm going to go outside and just toss the football around with somebody. Up for a game? Well, if not, until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. Peace to all. Dr. J out.